Thank you so much for taking the time out to listen. My name is Nicole, and today we are talking about child abuse awareness. April is the month where many of you all may have already seen blue pinwheels, blue ribbons, blue t-shirts, just various symbols, especially around government buildings or any building that deals with social work. Child abuse awareness is something that we all, every now and again, need to be informed about, because sometimes you're talking to people and you don't really think too much about what they're telling you. Sometimes you notice something about a child and, you're thinking maybe there's something a little bit off, but oh well, and you just kind of go about your business, okay? The same sort of attitude takes place with domestic violence as well. A person knows that something is off, but they really don't want to involve themselves because, well, we don't know what she did to cause it, or we don't know if that child is just a demon from hell. So, and that sort of attitude is what gets some people put in hospitals and worse, 6 feet deep in their graves. In the past, some of the things that I'm going to talk about today was not considered abuse. I'm not naive or ignorant when it comes to this particular subject matter. There were times in my life where I had to reevaluate how I was parenting, because I recognized that sometimes we will either see or hear, or, folks will advocate, types of punishment rather than discipline, positive reinforcement, things like that, around us to condone because they know what they did or they know what they've experienced. So when you have teachers and social workers and counselors and, all sorts of people around you, and they're telling you this is what's going to happen in time if this is what you choose to do, then it's a wake-up call. But I understand that some people, they haven't been close enough to anyone to tell them that their parenting needs to be reevaluated. Okay, so today I'm going to give you the type of information so that you can reevaluate how you are doing some things as a parent, grandparent, great-grand, so that you're not perpetuating a cycle of more abuse, because that child is going to one day grow up and they're going to be an adult. And whatever they were programmed, and that's just what it is, influenced, they're going to go and they're going to eventually do the same thing, if not worse. Okay. Children do pick up on parents who simply do not like the fact that they even had children. Okay. I'm just tolerating you, didn't particularly care for your dad or your mother. So, and then before long, that's it. They're out the door. The child feels like, dad or mom wasn't really there for me emotionally, and or physically. I'm so glad to be out on my own. I don't have to deal with this passive aggressive, didn't really want to be a parent, but I guess I have to deal with this. So glad to be so far away from that. And many children, especially when I was in elementary, middle, and high school, we're talking about this sort of thing. My mom just the other night, she smacked me, she kicked me. My dad, he, whipped us, and he did this and that. We all had our share of, stories. And so when things out in media started defining what was good, what was bad, and then there were those judgments formed, quite naturally, the parents didn't want to get into trouble. So there was this denial that took place. What you saw wasn't really what you saw. What you heard wasn't really what you heard. What you experienced wasn't really what you experienced, because no one wants to end up being written up or told about what they're doing that's hurting a child. And they definitely didn't want to go to jail. Okay. So, and even now, the same thing happens. I don't want you to say this or say that because this isn't really considered abuse. And just be grateful that you got food and shelter over your head. This sort of thing plays out. And now that many people have been put in quarantine with children and they're not used to having to parent children all day, every day, yes, they are challenged in ways that they thought they would never be challenged. But once again, we need to bring some awareness to this topic, like so many others, and hopefully someone will, as I said, reevaluate what they're saying and what they're doing to a child. Mayo Clinic, the Child and Family Advocacy Center, says any intentional harm or mistreatment to a child under 18 years old is considered child abuse. Child abuse takes many forms, which often occur at the same time. So it's not just the physical abuse. There is also the emotional abuse. It's not just the sexual abuse, but it's the physical, the emotional, okay? So a lot of times the abuse is paired, okay? Physical child abuse occurs when a child is purposely physically injured or put at risk of harm by another person. So let's say a mother knows that her boyfriend tends to be a short fuse, yet she leaves her child at home with him while she goes shopping, purposely putting that child in danger. Or the father notices that there are bruises on the arms or the legs or even around the neck, but doesn't do anything about it other than scold his wife or threaten his wife. And then she goes and does the same thing while he's away. Okay. The step parent who doesn't want to believe that the biological parents are doing some things and it's not my business. So she never says anything. She doesn't bother to call anyone to investigate. Okay. So physical abuse is prevalent oftentimes with some of these situations. It's just a matter of, as I've said in other audio, connecting the dots and seeing what exactly is happening. Because yes, can a child come up with a story? They can. But then there are those times where that's not what they're doing. They are saying that this happened. And you know what some individuals who are guilty as charged is going to do? She don't know what she's talking about. She is crazy. You know, her mother's crazy too. I mean, I would never hurt a child. The fact that somebody would tell that lie on me, I mean, really, you see. Sexual abuse. Sexual child abuse is any sexual activity with a child, such as fondling, oral genital contact, intercourse, exploitation, or exposure to child pornography. Back in the day, there were some adults who didn't think there was anything wrong with leaving a magazine out that had all sorts of pornographic acts for anyone in the household to take a look at. There were those who you heard through the grapevine that were touching a child in inappropriate ways. And they thought because a child wasn't fighting them or was giggling about it or whatever, well, she likes it or he likes it. Then there were, of course, those who were forcibly put in sexual acts, whether with an adult or between children. These sorts of things were known depending on who that child confided in. And so what would happen is, especially the mothers who were told about this sort of thing happening, they would say, no, he never did that. Or you be quiet because something really bad could happen to him. I don't want to hear any of that, you see. And then some children simply didn't say anything because they just didn't want any type of repercussions or retaliatory types of things to happen to them for opening up their mouths. So they tolerated and they tolerated it and they tolerated it some more until eventually their minds could only take but so much. Now here comes drugs and alcohol at very young ages. Here comes a pregnancy. Maybe this baby will love me because I never felt loved. The consequences of this sort of thing was pretty much used in a way where, well, that's just her issue, but they never wanted to connect the abuse that the children endured with why they were misbehaving or acting up later in life or making poor decisions. And of course, when they did find out some things, they sure didn't encourage any type of counseling, because then that means that I got to talk about you and talk about the act or many acts. And this is why I'm the way I am and that sort of thing. See, so be quiet, go on with your life, forgive and forget. Some of you all know how those victims, because a lot of times they were victims themselves, counseled, so-called, advised. Emotional abuse. Emotional child abuse means injuring a child's self-esteem or emotional well-being. It includes verbal and emotional assault, such as continually belittling or berating a child, as well as isolating, ignoring, or rejecting a child. Those that have, dare we say it, a higher intelligence tend to use this quite a bit. And they would not consider it to be abusive. I just want my child to be the best. I just want my child to be the most successful. I think that if I ignore or withdraw, he or she will notice what's happening and they'll do better. And instead, this sort of abuse, it took a different turn. Many children ended up suffering with just all sorts of issues. Once you lower a child's self-esteem, they are going to want to get approval from anyone and everyone, especially when you're a parent and you're responsible for the child's well-being. So if daddy is not going to show me the type of attention, respect, love, what have you, that he would want me to show him, I'm just going to find someone else who's going to give me what he didn't. There are those mothers who they belittle children, called them all sorts of names, threatened them, told them, you better do this and you better do that. And if you don't, here's the consequences and all of that. When you hear this over and over again for every little itty bitty thing that a parent is easily irritated by, you will not be the best person to socialize with over time. Now, every time when you're in the presence of relatives or friends, or just in the presence of people watching, now you're being critical, if not even worse, because of what you heard and what you experienced growing up. This sort of behavior is dysfunctional. Some people have used this sort of behavior to raise their self-esteem, to make them feel better about themselves, only to have memories of yesteryear come back and remind them why they're acting the way they're acting, why they're doing what they're doing. I know all too well about emotional abuse. This sort of thing followed me even long after being around controlling, power tripping type of people. Okay. It seemed like I just attracted just folks who just don't mind calling you names, don't mind threatening you, jumping up in your face, trying to be big, bad, ugly, because they have their poor self-esteem. And they can pick up on who is, dare we say it, the weak link, and here they come, you see. I think that parents, too, can see early on where you might be a bit emotionally unstable. You might be prone to being difficult. And so rather than being loving and kind and respectful and generous and whatever else towards you. They see your dysfunction, they see your disability, they see whatever, they can't handle it, and so they're going in on you, you see. But we don't excuse this sort of behavior. I never make excuses for it. There were times where at one point when I was dysfunctional, and seeing how dysfunctional I was in a relationship, I realized that making excuse for abuse is not what you do. You don't make excuses for the abuser. The abuser is who he or she is, period, point blank and simple. They don't plan on changing for nobody, and they believe that they're right in everything that they do. Okay. The best advice that I've given people who have been in situations where there was emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, you name it, was get out. Get out. Get your counselors. Get on the phone. Get in the, presence of someone. Tell them what's going on so that they can get the exit plan together for you. You see, back when I was in school, I had a teacher who wanted me to share what was going on because she noticed something was a bit off about me. And I did tell her what was going on, and she asked me, basically, did I want to report some things? And at that particular time, I said no. You see, nowadays, though, children will not hesitate to report on some of these caretakers, okay? While other children, once again, if they have some type of emotional instability, they're scared, they're just very worried about some things, they have a disability, they feel like if they tell something really bad is going to happen, you just won't hear those stories. They will pretend as if everything is just fine. How are you? Great, I'm good. Thank you for asking. And meanwhile, you can see the way they're holding their head, the way their spine is curved, the way they're moving real slow. Some of them like older people. And you're saying, what in the world happened to that child? You see. And sometimes there's just nothing more that you can do other than to direct them to resources. And they have to be the ones to speak up. Then once the ball is rolling, some of them anyway will turn it around and they'll say, no, none of this happened. And, that person's just making it up and all that. And that's very frustrating for someone who's trying to get a child some help. You just told me that this happened, or I asked you some questions and I don't want to talk about it. I don't just go away. Okay. So I know it's tough. I know it's tough for some of you counselors, prayer warriors, doctors, relatives. But sometimes the only way that you're going to be able to get some things going is the child has to be willing to tell the truth. Medical abuse. Medical child abuse occurs when someone gives false information about illness in a child that requires medical attention, putting the child at risk of injury and unnecessary medical care. So you have those individuals who they know full well what happened the night before, a week ago, but they're going to come up with some other story. They're going to say that something else happened. Meanwhile, the doctor's going to treat for one thing, but it's really something else. Okay. And that's all because they don't want to be found out that they were the ones who hurt the child, or they know of someone who hurt a child. You have individuals who, when peer abuse even takes place, maybe it's not the parent, maybe it's a peer, a sibling abuse. There's some fighting going on, but I don't want your brother getting in trouble because he's already got enough problems, or I don't want your sister going through anything. So you just tell the doctor that this happened and that happened. It was an accident. And meanwhile, the child has been repeatedly abused by a peer or a sibling for days, for weeks, for months. Mom got to go to work. Dad got to go to work. They don't know what's going on. They come home. How is everything? It's good. The child who's at fault, hurting, the other child has already prepped his or her sibling not to say nothing. Please don't say anything. Okay. And peers as well as siblings can do any of the things that I mentioned. They can physically abuse, they can sexually abuse their sibling, they can emotionally abuse. While someone in the household commits medical abuse and tells a doctor or nurse something totally different. Neglect. I don't think this particular abuse is going anywhere. There's always going to be, matter of fact, with all of these abuses, there's always going to be someone somewhere around the world experiencing these things. We can pray and we can pray some more. But God, as we very well know, He is not treating us like robots. He's not. We still have a choice to do what's right. And so when you have individuals who they know that it's not right to not provide adequate food, shelter, affection, supervision, education, or dental or medical care. They know it's not right, but yet they do it anyway. That is a choice they made. And there's consequences to not providing for children, okay? Some parents, they didn't see it back when they did it. They didn't see that cutting groceries was neglect. No, I'm just cutting the grocery bill because I got to pay for this and I got to pay for that. Okay, well then you should be looking into food banks. You need to look into signing up for welfare. I'm not doing that. Well, right now it's looking like you're being very neglectful. Pride is getting in the way. Or we're just going to stay over at so-and-so's house because I need to save some money. But those people in that household are abusive. Let's say it's not the parent, but it's the people who they're staying with or who the parent is letting the child go over to see. There's so many who will say, well, if I would have known, or you should have told. Children are children. They're not adults. They're not adults. Those individuals who punish because using a lack of affection. I'm not giving you no hug. I'm not giving you no kiss. You get on my nerves. You said this, you said that. Child, go ahead on somewhere. Okay? That's neglect. Children in the other room, jumping around, playing, taking stuff out of cabinets, messing with dangerous things. I remember one particular individual did not lock up his gun. The children messed around with that gun. One of the children ended up shooting his brother. Okay? What were you doing? Sleeping? Later on, that's just what he was doing. He was sleeping. He didn't bother to lock up, once again, his weapon. Education. You don't have to go to school. You stay here and you take care of your brother, your sister. There's plenty of that going on back in the day, and it still goes on. Okay? Or you make sure that your brothers and sisters are fed. Well, there's hardly any food in the refrigerator. Well, then you just figure that out. I got to go to work. And, of course, children whose teeth are just so messed up. They're even in some pain. I don't have any money for no dentist. We can tie a string to a doorknob and yank your teeth out that way because I ain't got no money. Meanwhile, there is medical assistance programs for people who are low income, right? Medical care. Child falls, child gets hurt. Somebody wants to come up with their own way of dealing with the injury. Well, I watch a YouTube video on it. I ain't got no money. You see, this sort of thing is abusive. They can come up with whatever excuse they want to come up with. It's abusive. It's neglectful. Okay? So, bringing awareness to these types of abuses, God in all his mercy and grace, this also helps some folks get some things together before authorities get involved, before parents who they may not be guilty, but they're the caretakers, whoever's taking care of the child is. It gives them an opportunity to get their acts together before you know what hits the fan. Because if a parent who is not abusive finds out that a caretaker is doing any of these sorts of things, there is going to be hell to pay. Okay, there is. And I don't see God sparing the rod, so to speak, you see. And speaking of, there are those individuals who they say, well, it's in the Bible. I mean, we're supposed to do this, that, and the other. God didn't say anything about abusing. Okay. He did not say anything about abusing children. And so you got folks who will take scriptures like that and they'll justify beating a child over and over and over again with a stick is okay. Or, hitting them so hard to the point where they can't even sit down. It's just excruciating pain. Well, the Bible say no. Once again, God didn't say anything about abuse. The body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. We don't abuse the temple. I'm telling you, people will find any and every way to justify what they do. When we're wrong, we're wrong. When we're wrong, we're wrong. Has there been times where I looked at myself, like I said in the earlier part of this video, I had to reevaluate some things. And why did I have to reevaluate? Because I realized that just because what happened back in the day doesn't justify, being that way in the present. Like I said, we can learn from our parents. We can very well learn from our grandparents. We can learn from the neighbor down the street, right? As children, we can learn from, other relatives. There was abusive behaviors that took place. And it, like I said, it's not always about the parents. You heard, you saw where other people did some things. And I seen that far more times than me getting my behind whipped. I saw other folks go through some stuff. I heard their stories. I heard their cries. And that plays a part as well, mentally, on your psyche. And while people are saying, it's okay, it's all right. And you're saying, those kids are screaming. Those kids, are sitting there, they're talking about how hungry they are. What? Or they're told that they're not going to get this and they're not going to get that unless they do A, B, and C. What? And they're trying to tell us, well, so-and-so, the reason why I had to do this was, Jesus. I'm telling you, this is why some of them are reaping the consequences of not having their children around. This is why some of them are not being able to have the connection with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, you see. Because the cycle has to stop. The ignoring has to stop. The belittling, the calling that person every name but their name, whether to their face or behind their back. Child abuse turns into adult abuse later on. And some of these very children who were once victims, now they see their now they are adults, and now they see their parents older, and now their parents are experiencing abuse, which we call elder abuse. It doesn't make it right, but I recognize why things happen. You beat that child. You took cigarettes. I remember kids telling me how their parents would take cigarettes and burn them with them. They'd be so frustrated with them. Didn't I tell you, shut your mouth, shut your mouth, shut your mouth. You're not listening? And then they go and they burn the child. The children who told me that they got beat with extension cords. Okay? And we're children. And be quiet. Don't say nothing, okay? But I'm going to tell you what my mom did. The children who showed up at school with black eyes in both eyes. The children who had cracked ribs. Okay? Lord Jesus. The children who were walking funny. And other children pointing it out. You know why she walked like that? No. Why? Because it was some people that mess with her. You know why she's so scary about everything? Because somebody bothered her. You know why he's fighting all the time? Because of some things he's seen in his household. His mom was getting beat up by the boyfriend or by his father or whatever. You see. Children hold a lot. And I was holding those stories when I was a kid because they told me don't say anything. And back in those days, to be quite honest, a lot of those teachers, they were just like, just show up and do your work and don't give me any problems. It wasn't until I was like a teenager that one teacher was like, okay, what's going on? Because I noticed something's different. But all before, no. Late 70s, early 80s. When you think of child abuse, according to WebMD, your first thought may be of a child with bruises or other marks that raise red flags. But the signs aren't always so clear. It can be physical, sexual, or emotional. She may be neglected, meaning her caregivers don't provide for basic needs like food or safety. What makes abuse even harder to stop is that most of the time the abuser is someone the child knows, okay? Some of these mothers who were desperate for money, they put their children at risk of being abused, okay? Some of them even went so far as to tell their child to do certain acts to bring money into the household, okay? Especially those that were on crack. They didn't mind throwing their children under the bus. And then you would ask them, where's your child? Oh, she's with a relative. Meanwhile, that's not what happened. She gave that child over to some pimps, players, or hustlers so that she could get some money. And she's strung out, messed up. Later on in life, once again, that child who turns into an adult, Mama, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And all she can say is she's sorry, or I'm glad you turned out to be okay. And some of these people didn't turn out to be okay. They're just acting as best they possibly can. They got so much trauma going on because of what happened to them over and over and over again. What makes abuse even harder to stop is that most of the time the abuser is someone the child knows. Once again, she may be reluctant to say something because she may want to protect that person or is afraid of what they will do if she speaks up. So you're taught early on, what goes on in this house stays in this house. You're taught early on, be quiet, shut your mouth. You're taught early on, don't say a you know what thing or otherwise I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. So you're already teaching the child to be to be weak. To be weak mentally, because that same child goes into workplaces, gets involved in relationships, joins groups or whatever. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything. I'm just going to be quiet. Is there something you want to talk about? Nope. You see, it's important to know how to recognize different types of abuse and what you can do if you suspect it. Now, some of the things I had already talked about, burning a child, right, with cigarettes, or allowing them to mess with things that could cause their injury, that's physically abusive. Hitting, kicking, and biting is also abusive. Holding a child underwater, yes, we're going to be a bit more specific. WebMD is one of those sites that has a lot of good information. Shakes or throw a child, okay? Throws objects at the child, ties the child up. Forces a child to take part in pornographic pictures or videos. Has any sexual contact whatsoever, as we mentioned earlier. Makes phone calls or sends emails, texts, or other messages that are sexual in any way. Shows the child someone else's genitals. Emotional abuse can also take place when the child is around a parent, a brother, a sister, or a pet, the parent decides, or the caretaker decides to abuse those people who that child cares the most about, or the pet. There's this failing to show love and affection. A lot of times people were saying, well, that's because he didn't feel loved, as a child, or she didn't feel loved as a child. Still doesn't excuse that type of behavior. They should have got some help. They should have sat down and had counselors talk with them. Something should have been done. But that wasn't good enough just to say that, well, they didn't have this and so therefore it makes it okay. No, it doesn't. Ignoring a child and not giving them emotional support or guidance or anything. That child is crying. You tell that child, shut up, shut up, shut up. I remember during the early stages, because my mind was that, oh, boys, they're supposed to be tough. They're supposed to be this and that. So, the children were younger, and I'm like, be quiet. Don't be doing all that crying. Shut your mouth. Shut your mouth. That sort of thing. And then one day there was a light bulb that went off, and I'm like, no, I don't want to be that way. It's okay for them to cry. And I started telling them, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay for you to cry. Calm down. We're going to take care of this, or we're going to take care of that. But it took me about a minute to figure that one out, because it seemed okay. It seemed natural. Shaming, belittling, criticizing, or embarrassing children, that is not the way to go. But you got those individuals who, but I'm going to get this child to behave. Yeah, sure, you'll get that child to behave, but that child has a cold space being developed in their heart, Lord Jesus. That cold space, you're doing a good job, because that child, and I say that tongue in cheek, trust you me, it is not a good job. But if you want to develop a cold-blooded, cold-hearted child, doing all this sort of stuff to that child, that's just what's going to happen. And that same child is going to turn on you sooner or later. Teasing, threatening, bullying a child, yelling at them. Look at your face. Ooh, look at your body. Ooh, you smell funny. You look funny. Ooh, yeah, you got a big head. That must be on your mama's side of the family. All that, you see, all of that is wrong. Once again, you want to develop a cold-blooded, cold-hearted child, you keep talking crazy to them and see what happens. If you are that one that's suspecting that there is some kind of abuse taking place, bruises, welts, injuries, markings on their hand, belt marks, things like that, you can see sometimes, especially on fair-skinned individuals. Also, you can even smell sometimes that something's off, something's wrong. Also, when a child who's been physically abused does not want, to be bothered with people, they start to withdraw. They are not wanting to touch, right? They don't want physical contact. There was a period of time where I did not want anybody hugging me. Just don't. I would freeze up. I wouldn't put my arms around folks. Okay? They were saying things like, come on, put your arms around me. Give me a hug. What's wrong with you? There were times where they would turn their cheek and say, give me a kiss. And I would not want to kiss them. Okay? I had experienced my share of issues. And like I said, people who don't want you to know the truth, people who want everything to be quiet, they're not going to admit to too much of anything. They're going to once again say, that child's crazy. That child always had a problem. That child's so unforgiving. That child's so hateful. That child's so evil. Whatever they want to say, I had exhibited the types of signs that something was off. I told you a teacher paid attention and saw something is off about that child. I don't know what's going on, but I need to talk to her. You see. There are those that, hey, and we remember I think a lot of us back in the day, especially if you had parents that were strict, you'd be afraid to go home. Now, why was you so fearful to go home? Well, we could just brainstorm a little bit. You were late. You knew you were supposed to be at home at a certain time, so you was afraid of the consequences. You were afraid to go home because a teacher called, and you said something or did something in that classroom. You was afraid to go home because you got an F and you knew that D's and F's was a no-no. So there was going to be some consequences. There was going to be something waiting for you, whether it was a belt, whether it was a shoe, whether it was a stick. Some of you all, you remember. And then later on in life, you were like, I got to figure something out because this is not the way I want to be. So some individuals went all the way to the extreme with their parenting where, no, I'm not hitting them. I'm not talking to them negatively. I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to let a child be a child. Others, you went the other way and you became abusive too. Or you were somewhere in between. And then you got to a point where you were like, you know what? I don't want to deal with this. So you may have eventually became lax. I know that there was a time that I started becoming lax, because I was just like, I don't want my kids to be scared, like walking around talking about, oh my God, she's going to beat me. She's going to do this. She's going to do that. I didn't want that, you see. But then you got to have some kind of discipline. So then I was like, well, I got to start taking stuff away. You know, one child was acting up and I was like, okay, I'll take everything out your room. You see, I mean, when you strip a parent of every form of discipline, yeah, that's when you get the spoiled brats. That's when you get that child who goes to the school, starts back talking and giving everybody else problems. And it's interesting, like I told my kids, I said, you know, there's a police officer who still carries a baton or he carries a stun gun or something. So you can keep on acting silly if you want to, because where you don't get told around this time, later on in life, you will get told in more ways than one. And then for a couple of them, it was like, let me just straighten up, because this woman, she talk about the police now. Exactly. Because, you know, you still want, you don't want to be the parent who just, once again, is neglectful. And then you don't want to be the parent that's abusive. So I always say, just pray, ask the Lord. The Lord's butt whippings are so much worse, I think, for children than we could ever be anyway. Because he does things in a way that he knows the heart. And so that child sitting up there crying and you're like, what happened? I did this and I did that. They start confessing. What? What happened in here? There was nobody in here whipping this child or calling them names. They just talking about they want to do better. And then you find out that the children that they're around maybe, or somebody, you know, is calling them out on some things. So, I mean, there's a way to get children to behave, you know, without going off the deep end or without being that nonchalant parent. Another thing you can pay attention to is that a child seems to always be on high alert. It's like they're always, you know, watching. They're very serious to be so young. You know, they're just always like, okay, what's about to go down? I don't know. I don't want to be around if this happens. You know, they're guarded. They're just always just looking around, looking over shoulders. They don't seem to be comfortable in your presence. They don't wear clothing that matches the weather, such as long sleeves on hot days to cover up bruises. Another thing is that some parents don't want to spend the money on clothes because, well, I got this and I got that, they say. But then you see them driving in this real nice car, or you see them going to these really nice places with their girlfriends or the boyfriends or whoever else. But yet that child don't have a coat and a hat and boots and gloves. And the weather is, you know, below the 0 or 25 degrees or 30 something. It's cold. And then they're withdrawing from friends and activities. This is always a clear sign. How come you don't want to hang out with your friends? I know you like them and everything. No. And then this is something that some of you all, I know that it's going to be a bit disturbing, but you need to pay attention to what the signs of sexual abuse are. They're avoiding a certain person for no clear reason, and they won't tell you. They're staring at that person or they're looking away. The person is trying to cover up the way that child is behaving. The person is trying to cover up the way that child is behaving, saying things like, "Oh, she's fine, she's good. Don't be over there talking to my child. They're fine, Or are they really? But they don't want you to go out with them, or they don't want you to do anything. Well, that's because, and they make excuses. Why does she act like she's so afraid of you? I don't know. Bloody, torn, or stained underwear, bruising or bleeding around the genitals, pain or itching around the genitals that might cause problems walking or sitting, pregnancy or STDs, especially for boys and girls under 14 years old, refusing to change clothes in front of others, running away from home, Sexual activity or knowledge that people usually have only when they're older. Signs of emotional abuse, and this once again coming from Mayo Clinic, constant worrying about doing something wrong. Okay. Speech problems or delays in learning and emotional development. My thing was that I read way too fast and I couldn't comprehend what I read. So they ended up putting me in this program when I was in the 3rd grade and basically taken out of the classroom to go over reading. Okay. But at that particular time in my life, I had been hearing and seeing things, going over to my grandmother's house. Speech problems, or once again, delays in learning and emotional development, depression and low self-esteem, doing poorly in school, extreme behavior such as being way too obedient or way too demanding. Okay. So in the early days, it was way too obedient. I mean, my cousins would say, do this and do that. And I would just be that little kid that would do whatever they told me. And then too demanding later on in life, where I was around, cousins and friends and what have you. And I was demanding. Okay. Once again, when you've gone through some things, you act a bit different. Headaches and stomach aches with no clear cause. There were those adults who they went through this as children and they never shook it. They still had headaches. They still had stomach aches because of all of what they experienced, what they, saw. The child doesn't seem close to a parent or caregiver. She's not too close to her. And then you can fill in a blank, right? And that was always just a clear sign that there's something wrong in that house. You best believe it. Showing little interest in friends and activities. Most kids, they like to be around their friends. Most kids, they're a part of this activity and that one. What's going on? You see, people question, observing people question. And if you're taught, once again, as a child, don't you answer, don't you say this, don't you say that, you're not. And I see the same thing even now with some of these parents and their children. The children are not allowed to reach out to any extended family members. Nope. Because why? Those parents don't want us to know what's really going on, or why that child over the years was behaving in the way that they were behaving. Secrets, lots of secrets, but these children are becoming adults and eventually they're going to tell on some people. And I tell you, God will allow it. God will allow it. I had one of my sons who he sat down with me. He's, an adult now. And he sat down with me and he told me, he said, he said that there were times where I knew that you and Dad wasn't getting along because then you started yelling and you was upset with me, and I know that, it just wasn't a good idea for you all to stay together, you see. Then there were those times where I was like, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I went off, I was yelling. I was, spanking butts and stuff like that, and he was like, yeah. But then he said there were times where, yeah, we did deserve to get our butt spanked because we shouldn't have been acting like we was acting, and then you feel torn because you're like, well, I know I'm supposed to, be that great parent, but then at the same time, it's hard when you got a child that's freaking out, they're running around, you got to get them quiet, the neighbors are sitting up there like your kids are running and bumping and thumping and stuff, you better tell them to sit down, and so it's just a lot. And so he told me, he said, but he wouldn't have considered, anything that I was doing as abusive, That was good to know. And if anything, he got away with more things than I would have ever gotten away with as a child. So, signs of neglect. The child's always looking dirty. I saw that a lot growing up. Kids was just always dirty. I'm like, do they ever take a bath? Being left alone or in the care of other young children. That was happening with some relatives. Eating more than usual at a meal or saving food for later. There was those times where the kids, they were hiding food. And it wasn't that there wasn't any food, but they were hiding the food because they were afraid that the food was going to run out. Because where they had come from, they didn't see food in the house there was ketchup, there was, Kool-Aid, there was mustard. And then once they got in an atmosphere where, wow, there's food. Oh my goodness, and they were just, eating like it was the Last Supper. And then another thing is that when a child's not getting medical, dental, or mental health care when they need it, that's neglectful. And missing a lot of school. One relative said that that's what she was doing because she had to care for her siblings. And all she wanted to do was go to school. Poor weight gain and growth. If you're not eating, well, that's what's going to happen. Children were sick a lot too. I noticed that every time I turned around, some child was coughing or had some kind of runny nose. Just the sickness was just going around and around and around in the household. So if you do suspect that there is some type of abuse going on, you can call 911. You can take the child to the hospital. There's also the police, of course, that you can contact if you suspect that it is a daycare worker or babysitter or somebody. Because once this quarantine and all this is over, children are going to be back in the care of some of these folks who we're talking about. So if you know, you can do something about it. You can also help a child get therapy. Because sometimes there's the parent who, once again, wasn't abusive, but the child has gone through a lot, and you can be that one to suggest that the parent gets therapy for the child, so that, once again, that healing can take place. And then, of course, according to WebMD, make sure the child feels supported and knows that it's not their fault, okay? It's not your fault. It's not your fault that your mom went off the deep end that day. It's not your fault that your dad was drinking too much that day. It's not your fault that, you were dropped off where all these people, were being abused. It's not your fault. And I know someone, you're an adult now, and you're thinking about all these things, and you're saying, wow, I went through a lot, You did go through a lot, but you have survived. You could have been one of them that was 6 feet deep in your grave a long time ago. But God wanted you here. He wanted you here for good reason. And so we just thank God. We thank God for the trials and so forth, because we probably wouldn't be as compassionate and understanding. We probably wouldn't want to do some things different and break cycles and all of that and reach out and help others had we not gone through what we went through. So in some strange, twisted sort of way, it's like, well, thank you. Thank you to all those who hurt and abused and used, because I'm a better person. I'm a better person. What the demonic meant for evil, God turned around for something good. I don't want folks to go through that sort of thing. I didn't want to go through what I went through, but it happened. And, we take those lemons and we turn them around and we make some lemonade, baby, out of them, and we go and we reach out to people and we help them. And, we give them the resources that they need. So thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time out to listen to this lengthy message. I hope that it has just caused you to, once again, reevaluate some things as a parent, a grandparent, a great-grand. April is that time to, just simply sit back and think about these sorts of things and to prevent abuse where you can. Blessings to you. Please do check the description box for anything that might be of interest. You've been listening to YouTube Interim Enterprise 7. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment. We do welcome giving on this channel, and thank you in advance.